Welcome to the Well-Being Manifesto podcast, where we translate science and experience into realistic and sustainable ways of living. In each episode, we offer clear and practical strategies to support all aspects of well-being that matter to you, whether in your home, your community, or place of work. The Well-Being Manifesto is hosted by Dr. Moain Dabrh and Dr. David Freeman, who have spent their careers advancing whole person care. Join us as we focus on real lives and real change, with less hype, more truth, better living.
Hello, everyone. Welcome, one and all, to a new day of the Well-Being Manifesto. I am Moain Dabrh.
Yeah, and everyone, I'm Dave Freeman. Today's guest on the Well-Being Manifesto is Dr. Robert Waldinger, a renowned psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, and Zen priest. He directs the Harvard Study of Adult Development, the world's largest running scientific study of happiness. As a Harvard medical school professor and the co-author The Good Life, Dr. Waldinger and his co-author, Dr. Malte Schultz, have greatly advanced our understanding of happiness, long-term relationships, and well-being. His research, spanning 80 plus years of data, reveals that strong, meaningful relationships are key to long-term health and happiness, and even more than wealth or fame. Beyond his research, he's also a Zen meditation teacher and integrates mindfulness into his approach to mental health and life. In today's episode, we'll explore his insights on the science of happiness, relational well-being, aging, emotional health, and the role of our inner life in living a fulfilling good life. So with that introduction, Dr. Waldinger, I'll pass the talk to, go ahead, Moain.
Yes, great to have you with us, Bob, and really such pleasure. I want to start our conversation today. I'm often curious about growing up and experiences that influence us and the direction that we take in life later on. So I'm curious about you growing up. What are the experiences that you've had that formed or influenced who you are today and the direction that you took in life?
Gosh, where do I begin? I mean, I'm a psychoanalyst, so I could go on forever. So I grew up in Des Moines, Iowa. I was always really interested in what made people tick and different ways of living life. And so as a college student, I majored in history of science and studied why people did some of the crazy things they did and believed some of the crazy things they did. And then in medical school, I really loved psychiatry because I got to understand more about the many different ways that our minds operate. And I thought that was the most interesting stuff for me in medicine. And then I realized that I wanted to be able to study things in addition to working with patients one-on-one. And so I went back and learned research methods and eventually took over this longitudinal study that's followed all these families for 87 years. So that may make it sound like a straight path. It wasn't at all. But it's a kind of meandering path trying to follow what's most interesting to me.
Obviously, I'm of a neuro background, so I'm similarly fascinated. And I think, Bob, another kind of follow on is the study of adult development you guys have tracked since 1938, which is incredible. And now their children and grandchildren for it's almost a century. So I guess a question that comes out of this, could you briefly describe what this study is, and is there could you share perhaps maybe a surprising or science-backed finding around this long-lived happiness of health kind of study that you guys have?
Sure. The study began in 1938, as you said, and it began with two groups in the study. And the studies didn't know about each other, these two studies. One was a study of Harvard College undergraduates, sophomores, who were chosen by their deans as fine, upstanding specimens. And it was meant to be a study of normal development from adolescence to young adulthood. So, of course, if you want to study normal development, you study all white guys from Harvard, right? I mean, it's the most politically incorrect sample you could ever have. And we're constantly having to explain to NIH why it's still okay to fund us. So there was that. There was the Harvard group, 268 young men. And then at Harvard Law School, there was a study of juvenile delinquency. And they recruited a group of middle school age kids from the city of Boston in 1938 who were from not just the poorest families, but the most troubled families. So families known to social service agencies for domestic violence, for severe parental mental illness, drug addiction. And the question was, how is it that some children who are born into really difficult circumstances manage to stay on good paths and have normal developmental paths? So both studies were studies of what can go right in development. And that was unusual because most of the research we still do, and certainly back then, especially on children, was on what goes wrong so that we can help kids, right? And so this was a study of what goes right. And what are the predictors of who's going to be healthy, stay healthy? So that was the study. And nobody would have predicted that I'd be sitting here today saying the study was still going. I mean, that's just unheard of, that a longitudinal study goes that long. And there's so many chance occurrences and reasons why the study still goes. But to your question about what are surprising findings, probably the most surprising finding is the finding that you named, which was that our relationships with other people actually are the strongest predictor, or one of the strongest predictors, of not just who stays happy, but who stays healthy as they go through life. That was the surprise. It wasn't that having good relationships would make you happier. That's expectable. But how could it be that having good relationships would predict that you'd be less likely to develop coronary artery disease or arthritis or type 2 diabetes? Like, how could that possibly be? And so at first, we didn't even believe our own data. And then many other studies began to find the same thing, which is how we begin to have faith in medicine, in a finding as being real, not just, it could be idiosyncratic to our particular sample. But when many studies point to the same thing, that's when we really begin to have confidence that something is a fact. And that's what we're seeing.
This is amazing, especially for, as you mentioned, the study started with smaller cohorts and it's still going stronger and spanning to larger populations and next generations. As you are continuing to look at the findings over these different generations, there was one thing that was reported, and other studies also built on these findings, which is the prediction of the strength of social connections and interpersonal connections, and how it can predict physical health at later age or later phases of life. Why might emotional connections and closeness with others so strongly influence that physical aging component, and what does the science tell us about it?
Yeah. Well, the best hypothesis we have, and now some of the best research supports it, is a stress hypothesis that, stress is, of course, a normal part of life. And when we're stressed, the body immediately has certain changes. Blood pressure goes up, heart rate goes up, all those things that happen that we can feel in our bodies. And then when the stress is removed, our bodies are meant to go back to baseline, to equilibrium. What we think happens is that good relationships are kind of stress regulators. That, if you have something upsetting happen and you have somebody you can complain to, you can literally feel your body calm down while you complain. And one of the things we know is that social isolation and loneliness are stressful. And we think it's because the body never quite goes back to baseline. That we know that isolation is stressful probably because we evolved to be in groups. We know it's safer. There's more survival value in being in groups. So probably the people who were able to pass on their genes were the people who were better at being in groups, right? Because you don't get eaten as much by predators, or, and so we think that we evolved to a place where group belonging is less stressful and isolation is more stressful. So the theory is that if we are stressed chronically, we never quite go back to that equilibrium, then it sets up processes in the body that gradually break down our organs. So for example, if you're chronically stressed, you have higher levels of circulating cortisol. You have altered immune functioning, right? And those things can break down coronary arteries, break down joints, affect the insulin receptors. And so all of those things we think are responsible for the link between quality of relationships and physical health.
That's really important because we had a conversation with Dr. Amitsu, and he was talking about also the social connection and the sense of isolation from the within, from the one person. And you bring the other facet, which is the importance of connecting with others, especially through meaningful relationships, and the strength, the comfort, the power of connection within the group, and which is we're primed as humans to find that connection and look for that connection, and how it just physiologically and emotionally they're interconnected in the outcome of that. Part of the conversations that we have on the Well-Being Manifesto is that we also highlight that these things are not isolated, is that we need to work on the person, but also that interpersonal connection, and where those things are always interacting with each other.
That's a good point, because there's a lot of emphasis on just taking care of the self, right? And actually, we know that a lot of the wellness programs that just take care of the self don't really move the needle. They don't improve well-being. And that a lot of what improves well-being are programs that involve social connection, even if it means meeting somebody at the gym, even if it means joining a walking group or a running club, right? That we know that the connections that we have around self-care matter a lot for how much programs make a difference in well-being.
Yeah, that is amazing. And I just want to kind of piggyback on that concept. I think we're calling like social fitness. I think your research, these social interactions, even brief ones, have measurable effects on well-being. And I think you call them, Dr. Waldinger, micro interactions. And so my question is sort of, what does your research say in terms of these daily patterns of social time and happiness on this? How could someone build this consistent social fitness every day in their daily lives?
Yeah, well, one thing we know from the people we studied is that the people who were best at this stayed in touch with people. So they were the ones who were, making the phone calls, inviting people over, getting together, right? Who invested in what the political scientist Robert Putnam calls social capital, right? Where they would do things with other people. They joined clubs. They invited people over. Now, of course, we have text and email. It's even easier to stay in touch with people. So there is that. And then, as you were saying, we can have small interactions. So, some people are good at just talking to strangers, talking to the people they see, on the street, or people who check you out in the grocery store or get you your coffee at the coffee shop. And those interactions, it turns out, give us little hits of well-being. And so that's something that people can cultivate Some of us are more shy about that. There are also cultural norms, like, there are communities where you always say hi to people on the street. And then there are other communities where you would think that was creepy if people said hi to you, right? So what if we created more cultures where it was normal to acknowledge each other?
Those are really important thing. I mean, I can personally maybe relate to that, coming and growing up in a culture where, exactly as you said, hello, how are you is expected. It's not just the norm, it's expected. But then when you live in different countries and places where that norm changes, and it might, and to your point, you move from a place where you have received that dose of well-being to the opposite, to all of a sudden you feel a sense of isolation and alienation, even maybe. So those are important things to reflect on.
Yeah, yeah. And, and you can, in your own world, do more of the connecting, do more of, be a norm buster,
And that's a choice, that's a practice, that's an intentional practice. Yeah, I want to go back to the study and the Harvard Adult Development Study, and to your comment earlier about representation and the generalizability of its findings because of the choice of the cohort. And especially in the earlier start, it was white, male, Harvard uh, candidates. And then it evolved over time. So, what would you say about some of at least the earlier critiquing about the limitation of its findings, and then how over time do you think that these findings are now extending and expanding to other populations, and how they can represent that?
Yeah. So we had all white males. I mean, even the Harvard guys were the inner city guys were all white. Everybody thought, oh no, there'd be lots of people of color. No, because the city of Boston was 97.4% white in 1938. The waves of migration of people of color didn't come to Boston until after World War II. So if you want to start a study in 1938 in Boston, you get white people. So we did expand to women. We included all the spouses, and we then studied the second generation, more than half of whom are women. So we have a good gender balance now, but it's still almost all Caucasian. So what we do is we take care to make sure that the findings we present as generalizable, we present because they've been corroborated in more diverse groups. And there are more diverse groups being studied. And so these findings, for example, about social connection are very much corroborated in other cultural groups around the world. So our study is still limited in its sample. Every study is, there's almost no study that's completely representative of human beings. So every study has its limitations. So our job is to name those limitations, account for them, and make sure that we're not making claims about something as being generalizable if we're really only basing it on our small sample.
What are the changes that you have observed in terms of racial makeup changes in the latter generations now? And are you seeing more diversity into the study at this point?
No, in our study, no, because we're only studying the kids, and the kids came from two white parents. And so because the World War II generation really had virtually no intermarriage among the Harvard group or among the inner city Boston group, because there were no people of color in Boston to marry. And so we are an all-white sample. We haven't gotten more diverse. It's one of the reasons why we've decided not to branch out to the third generation, because there's been some change, some increase in diversity, but very little. So we think it's time for other researchers using more diverse samples to carry on this kind of research.
To replicate the efforts and continue
Yeah.
to branch it into different racial makeups.
Yeah.
This is so fascinating. And Bob, I think one concept that Moain and I talk about is these sort of three interlocking circles. I think he alluded to earlier. One we call the inner universe, and each brain has about 88 billion neurons, 10,000 dendritic connections per neuron. So it's like 1 point something trillion connections, right, per brain. But then when you add two brains, right, you're in the multi-trillions of connections. Then you get into the third circle, which is these organizational effects, right? So it gets very, very diverse very quickly. But I wanted to there was a discussion there about studying the children. I wanted to ask, looking at your data, the longitudinal data connecting into midlife and later outcomes. And I think the question is like, how is this, what have you guys found, and how like the child's nurturing or upbringing, their adult defense styles, or their future success, like how did your data show for our listeners, like what kind of things can we learn about early caregiving impact on their future life and success?
Ah, oh, early caregiving has a big impact on people's lives. I mean, as you know, there's almost nobody in the scientific world who doesn't agree with that, right? That early caregiving is huge because, as the brain doesn't develop in isolation. There, all of the inputs that have to do with how we're taken care of from, before we're born, and certainly from the moment we're born, have everything to do with which neural connections get made, which get strengthened, which get eliminated. I mean, there's just so much shaping of our brains and bodies by the way we're taken care of. And we see that, we've seen connections across 60 years, that the warmth of childhood, 60 years later, we can see the effects on how people relate to each other, on how secure they feel with an intimate partner, on their brains. So these effects are long and enduring. And obviously, there's the capacity for change. It doesn't mean that your childhood is your destiny, but there's a lot that gets laid down in childhood that's really vital. So, in fact, there was an economist, he still is living, I think, James Heckman, who did a study of where do we want to invest our money if we want to get the biggest payoff in terms of functioning adults who pull their own weight in society. And he showed that for every dollar we invest, actually, you get the biggest bang for your buck if you invest in age 0 to 4 and the people who support young children, because the impact, the long-term ramifications of the quality of caregiving of young children is enormous.
That is absolutely amazing data. Thank you.
There's a lot of research about those formative years, right? That about by around age 6, that the human mind has formed almost its direction and how a person is going to grow and choices that they make later in life. But also, an important thing that you highlighted is that we don't want to think that our childhood is our destiny, that the experiences that we had is that the capability and the capacity to make changes and inform these changes later in life.
Yeah. There's always, there's always this temptation to make it either or, to say, oh no, it's all brain. And certainly in my field, in mental health, it's all brain disorders, or it's all environmental, it has nothing to do with the brain. And of course, it's never one or the other. And it's always an interaction that's infinitely complex between biology and the social world and psychology.
I've heard those nature versus nurture, but I think it's both, right? It's nature and nurture.
Totally, it's both.
I want to maybe go at this, and specifically when you brought up the science and what the data, not only just from experiences that you have witnessed, but also more of the nuanced technology that you have invested to study this and quantify it, not just through qualitative work, but also data. And maybe from your own experience as a scientist and a Zen master, you have brought the elements of practice and research into your work. What does the wider literature say about harnessing the power of meditation and its impact? And maybe if you can share us about some of the data that you've done about the functional MRI, magnetic resonance imaging that you've done in studying people who introduce these practices into their lives.
Well, actually, we haven't studied that. We haven't done fMRI studies of people who meditate. But there have been those studies, as you know, and what I understand is that those studies really demonstrate that there's tremendous change that happens when people meditate in terms of brain connectivity. Brain areas often become more connected, more strongly connected through meditation. That there are just a variety of changes that happen. There are a lot of practices. One doesn't have to sit on a cushion and meditate. There are a lot of practices that involve mindfulness, that involve coming into presence, as opposed to just being lost in thought. And presumably, a lot of those practices would have similar effects on the functioning of the brain. I don't know about that research, so I can't say, but my hunch is that would be true, that it wouldn't just, you don't just have to sit on a cushion to get those changes.
Yeah, and I want to ask, Bob, your research talks about the power of the quote, like the beginner's mind. But what other kind of research do you have on either meditation or these brain states that could help people in, maybe seeing their environment or repairing relationships? Or, could you speak to how to harness sort of these brain states to improve their self and their lives?
What we do in the book is we offer some kind of suggestions for practices to help people, including just stopping, pausing, and being more mindful when you start to feel aroused, like particularly when you start to be upset with somebody or being in a difficult situation, where you just press the pause button and just pay attention. Okay, what am I feeling? What's going on here? That often is just putting in a little bit of a delay between the stimulus and the reaction that can be so helpful, particularly in relationships. And one of the things that meditation does really is it helps people sit still with things that they often don't sit still with, like emotion, and really watch how emotion arises and then passes away. Where do I feel it in my body? What do my thoughts do when I'm feeling upset? And so what meditation is so good at is helping us understand how emotions work and how our impulses work without acting on them. And then we realize, we can have a lot more choice about how we react to circumstances by essentially being placed into a situation where we deliberately say, okay, I'm not going to react to this. I'm just going to sit still and watch what happens when I'm feeling something, when I'm thinking something. And that's one of the best things that meditation does for us.
Yeah.
I actually want to go back to my earlier question, and I should have phrased it better. So let me rephrase that. Your work in bringing functional imaging and just seeing the function of the brain through imaging was in not about specifically about meditation, but also about witnessing what is good versus bad and how it impacts our brain. I want to make sure that was that part of your research and seeing the impact of happiness on our brains and how it changes the structure?
We did a study, an MRI study, showing people happy and sad images, positive and negative images. And there's a really good set of images that's been well tested. Rainbows and Ferris wheels versus creepy spiders, right? And so we showed people these images, and what we saw was that there were real differences in brain connectivity, particularly in older adults. We did this in 80-year-olds. And we showed that actually there's a lot more brain connectivity in 80-year-olds when they see positive images versus negative images. And what that actually was a study of was what we call the positivity effect, where as we get older, our brains shift, that there's a cognitive bias toward what's negative for most of our lives, where we're going to pay more attention to the scary negative stuff. That's why, social media exploits this, right? Politicians exploit this. Let me make you very afraid, right? And then you'll vote for me, right? And then what happens as we get older is that shifts, so that there is essentially a reversal, that our brains become more attuned to the positive. They remember positive stimuli better and for longer. So that people actually get happier as they get older. So the MRI study that you're referring to was a study of the positivity effect in older adults and what some of the neural underpinnings of that are.
So how can one reshape those experiences and the impact of those experiences over time, and thinking about the positivity effect? And as you said, there are sometimes biases in how we choose to see something or interpret something. Maybe also you brought up two powerful examples: social media, politics, anything influencing. And we are at the world of influence. I think these are the times of influence. How do we reshape that into an intentional, actually meaningful direction?
Yeah. Well, first of all, to just be aware of it, to notice, like when I notice, oh my gosh, I'm so attracted to this negative clickbait, like first to notice it and don't go there. Like go to avoid going to the place where you're drawn into the negativity, right? But really just to look at more neutral sources of information. And there are those still, although we're losing them. But to really to be aware of that, and to be aware of what it begins to feel like when you're drawn down that awful negative rabbit hole of negativity. And that can happen no matter what your politics are, right? And so that's really important, to understand the manipulative quality of that and to see if you can step back from it. And the other thing is, on a more individual level, one of the things that corrects for our negative bias, the negative bias of the mind, is gratitude practice. So I used to think gratitude practice was kind of hokey. Like, think of all the things you're grateful for. But then what I realized was that no, there's actually quite a specific mechanism going on there, that, let's say I'm annoyed with my wife because I don't like the way she loads the dishwasher, right? And I can really feel the annoyance. But what if I then call up, like, well, what would it be like if my wife weren't here, if she weren't in my life? And then I realize I'm so grateful for so many things, and how she loads the dishwasher is like irrelevant. It has it's of no significance compared to all the important things, right?
I think your earlier comment about either or, because we are a world of duality, and it's this or that. There is no in between. We can't be grateful for something, and it's okay to be annoyed by it. It does not exclude the fact that we're grateful for it.
And almost nothing is either or. Almost nothing is black and white in life. That's we want to make it that way, and we're told we should make it that way, and almost nothing is that way.
I think people will find it sobering that the happiness, one of the happiness leaders in the world, thought that gratitude was a little bit hokey pokey at the beginning. So I think they'll find something sobering about it.
Bob, as a neurologist, my brain, it overlaps a lot with, psych, and it's like, is it hardware, software, as you kind of alluded to? A lot of the discussion stimulates my brain to think about the default mode network. And, I think what Daniel Kahneman called system 1 and 2, the limbic system, and this higher cortical thing. And, it makes me wonder, do you think, like practicing gratitude, does that like grow the system 2 muscle, if you will, you know what I mean? And create that downstream positive brain health? Or I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Well, and it could also change the limbic system too, right? Because what we're talking about, I mean, what gratitude practice does is it evokes positive feeling, right? It's not just thinking about what I'm grateful for. It's like, oh yeah, that's so great. And then you really feel it, as opposed to the annoyance, the negativity. Because a lot of what drives us, as Kahneman showed, and many people have, emotions are really the driver. Emotions are really the horse. And our cognition is really the rider on top of the horse. And the horse is galloping away more often than not, and the rider is just trying to keep up.
That's brilliant. Yes, absolutely. I love that analogy.
So in your work, you acknowledged also that tensions in relationships can actually help build them. In some ways, it's a form of resilience training. What does the wider literature, your work, and other findings say about harnessing the power of conflict, and how they can impact happiness, and growth, social growth, over time?
Conflict is inevitable. I mean, we're going to have disagreements with almost everybody who's significant in our lives. So the question is not really, is it okay to have conflict, but really, how do we negotiate conflict? How do we work with it, right? So, the best relationships are relationships where people can manage conflict. They can manage differences and get through them, get to some place where both people feel okay and can find a way forward, and ideally a way forward where they're still in relationship. So the happiest, most stable couples are not couples who have no arguments ever. They're couples who work out their arguments in ways where both people end up feeling okay. And same with work relationships, friendships.
So it's about framing and reframing.
Yeah.
So we kind of have some feedback from some of our folks we've talked to. So this question kind of looks at more to the broader human experience, and I think Bob, you've probably it's around purpose, and different languages and cultures have different names. I think in Japan they call this ikigai. And, if you look at the work of Viktor Frankl, his book that was read by millions of people, Man's Search for Meaning, could you speak to, Bob, sort of from a neurobiological perspective and also from a life course, how do people harness that purpose, to build this kind of life resilience?
I probably can't talk about it from a neurobiological perspective because I don't know about it. There might be research, but I don't know about that. I know that there is psychological research and developmental research on it, which basically says that people certainly are more satisfied with their lives and they actually stay healthier and more active if they have a reason to get up in the morning, which is not rocket science, right? It's like some sense of I have a reason to go do the things I do. And, it could be anything.
Right.
It could be raising a child. It could be planting a garden. It could be doing something particular at work. But I think, the retirement researchers talk about mattering. And I think what they say is, everybody needs to feel like they matter in some way. in the world? Does my being here matter? And I think that purpose, ikigai, whatever we call it, is something about a sense of my life. What my life has some purpose. I matter somehow. It matters that I'm here on Earth, and there's no set way to do that or find that, but people can find it, even if they're in jobs that they don't care much about, and many people are. There are ways to find ways to find people to whom you matter at work, or find things outside of work that give you purpose. Anyway, that's all to say. I don't know about the neuroscience, but I know about the psychological science.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think, Mahali, Mahali, if I'm pronouncing his name, the book Flow, right, talks about this little narrow corridor, right? They're exactly what you mentioned. There's people that are doing these, what we would, some of them are doing really mundane jobs, but they're just like, they seek it like their purpose, right? And they're super resilient to it. So I love that response. A follow-up question, Bob, from your book, The Good Life. Just if there's one thing from your book that, like, what would everyone keep in mind, like a takeaway for the audience to carry forward from your Good Life, what would it be, do you think, around these themes?
It would really be to find ways to be more active in connecting with people and in staying connected with people, that it has huge benefits, both emotional and physical, and that it's worth it. And that a lot of the forces in our culture now push us toward isolation, and that we probably need to be very proactive in structuring our lives to counter those trends toward isolation, to really move ourselves more toward an orientation toward constant connection with other people.
I want to actually just add, I'm curious about, and maybe the name of the study and the focus on happiness, which some people might argue about the difference between happiness and joy. So for you, as a scientist and practitioner, and an expert in this field, how do you address those questions about saying that happiness is more about the external experience versus joy about the internal experience, and why that was not accounted for as part of or integrated in the study results if it wasn't?
Let me reframe it. So there's good research. I mean, we could define, there's so many ways to define all these terms, right? But they're just words. But there has been some pretty good research on different types of happiness. And the research points to two big types. One is called hedonic well-being, which means, am I having fun right now? Is this a good party? Am I enjoying this meal? The moment-to-moment pleasures and that changes literally moment to moment, hour by hour, certainly day to day, right? And then there is the other kind, which is called eudaimonic well-being, from the Greek. And it means kind of, is life basically good and worthwhile? Even on the days when I'm having a bad day, is life basically good? And the idea is that people often prioritize one type of happiness, the hedonism or the meaning and purpose, one type over the other, but that often most people want some of both. And that often at different times in our lives, we prioritize one type over the other. There's also a third type that a researcher is now writing about a lot. His name is Oishi, and he's writing about what he calls psychological richness, which is a third dimension, which is that some people really want psychologically rich experience. So it might mean like new stuff, like travel. It might mean trying new things all the time. They want enlivening conversations. It doesn't mean it's always fun. It doesn't always mean it has meaning or purpose. It's just rich, different, enlivening, right? So some people seem to prioritize psychological richness in their lives. So I would say those are kind of the three big flavors of happiness, well-being that research points to. And then how we define the terms is probably less important.
Can we ask you to stay with us for another 10 hours? Because we could go on and on. So,
I mean, I could certainly talk with you longer, but it's probably I have some other things I'm supposed to do.
yes, no, we appreciate you. And as you said, these emotions and experiences and feeling it's a spectrum, and it's important to recognize how we experience it, not necessarily, yes, from scientific and point of view, and sometimes for other reasons, we focus on the choices of words, and that is powerful and important. However, I think the outcome is what matters eventually. It's that experience of life, as you said, and what it yields and its impact on us. So, Bob, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your humility, and all what you bring to this world through experience and research and science. And I know for you personally, one of your experiences of happiness was the recent addition to your family and being a grandparent. So congratulations on that, and we're very happy for you and your family, and we wish you the best. I cannot recommend enough this book, The Good Life. It is powerful. It is rich, and I have personally gifted this book to many people in my circle of life and work, because it is enriching. So thank you again for your time, and we appreciate you joining us today. And for those who are listening or watching, if today's conversation resonated with you, we encourage you to explore The Good Life, the book, and all the different interviews and the TED Talks that Dr. Waldinger has done, and take a deeper dive into his work and experience. If you are drawn to future conversations like this, we encourage you to subscribe to the Well-Being Manifesto podcast and join us at www.thewellbeingmanifesto.com for updates and extras. Until next time, inward with courage and outward with compassion.
Thank you for joining the Well-Being Manifesto podcast. Be sure to subscribe, like, and leave us a comment or review. To learn more about this discussion, visit thewellbeingmanifesto.com. And remember, inward with courage, outward with compassion.